Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the regular council meeting. I first want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. So we have the agenda. Could any changes to the agenda required? Seeing none, then the agenda is adopted by consent. Then we have the consent agenda. Is anything out in there that council would like to discuss? Then the consent agenda is approved by consent. Business arising from the minutes. There's something that, that will come up from Mabry. I believe Councillor Skipsey will bring that up. No delegations, bylaws. Who can I start with that? Mr. Raj? Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before you are two permissive tax exemption bylaws for consideration.
These exemptions play an important role in supporting local nonprofit organizations and community groups that provide valuable services for our residents. Permissive tax exemptions are a tool that Council can use to support organizations that contribute to the social, cultural, educational, environmental well-being of our community. They are granted under Section 224 of the Community Charter and provide relief from property taxation to qualifying nonprofit and charitable organizations. Bylaw 904 exempts 23 properties from taxation, and Bylaw 905 is focused on places of worship and exempts the surrounding lands and grounds of 6 properties. The proposed bylaws will result in an exemption of approximately $482,000 in total taxes. That includes the municipal portion, school taxes, RDN, and other non-municipal taxing authorities. Approximately $236,000 rather of that amount represents the municipal portion. And the bylaw must be adopted by October 31st in order for the exemptions to be applicable for the 2025 taxation year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or concerns that Council may have regarding these bylaws.
Any questions, or would like someone to make the motion to start first reading? Councillor Harrison?
Just one question, if I may, Your Worship.
Sure.
Just through the chairs, Mr. Hare. So I see that several of these are exemptions for the Island Corridor Foundation, yet I think the town has to provide funds for the Island Corridor Foundation for crossings. So if we're not exempt from them, why are they exempt from us?
Mr. Hare.
I would have to take a look into that. And again, these exemptions are provided purely at Council's discretion. So if Council chooses not to provide the Island Corridor Foundation a exemption, it's totally within Council's purview.
And just, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Just maybe something when we're having a conversation in the distant future, we might want to flag with them that this is the status quo, and you know, we're doing them this as a favor essentially, and it would be nice to see the favor reciprocated.
That's a good point to raise. Ms. Coates.
Yes, I believe they feel the favor has been reciprocated in allowing trail use adjacent to the rail line. So throughout the corridor, right to the Upper Island down to Victoria, municipalities were offered agreements to allow for trails in the rail right-of-way. This was back many years ago. And because of that, the agreement identifies that each municipality will offer an exemption from property taxes. It states in the agreement that if they do not, then they would be charged, the agreement would change.
Yes, there would be probably encroachment fees or something. So could I have someone make the motion for first reading? We'll take them one at a time. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander for first reading and discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? For second reading, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison. Second reading. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Third reading, Councillor Young, Councillor Vander discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And the same for bylaw number 905 for first reading. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for second reading, Councillor Young, Councillor Vander discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for third reading, Councillor Vander Councillor Harrison, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Committee liaison reports. It was a real privilege to welcome the Tour de Rock again in Qualicum Beach. We had a town crier there. They were a little bit late. They were actually early. They were early this time. Yeah, they were early. And they were cold and wet, so I said, I'm not going to argue with you being on time, because if you're cold and wet in the rain, they want to go inside. So some of us missed the event, but it was still a good occasion to celebrate in the work they do and raising the money that they are. Secondly, there was had a Zoom call, and I'll just be very short on that. It's more of an RDN issue. But there is a group called Street or Home, and they purchased a 47-acre farm in Nanu's Bay for what they call Delancey Street. This is a new Canadian society. It's been quite successful in the United States. And what they do is they offer a structured 2-year live-in educational community that functions as an extended family and instills strong traditional family values, stressing work, ethic, personal responsibility and social accountability, and so on. So this is not in Qualicum Beach. It's in the Neuse. It's a 47 acreage near the weigh scales. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up. You may hear more about it. And of course, by now, everybody knows we're going on the referendum for the pool, for finally doing the addition that was scheduled, I think, about 6 years ago. And things don't get cheaper when you wait. So I think it was probably doubled in price since then. So the question will be put by the referendum through the RDN sometime, I think, this fall. And it will be for about 30 million to see the addition to the pool. That is really needed. The volume of people that go through there, the change rooms, the use of the pool, it deserves an addition. So that shows you how am I going to vote when it comes to a referendum question, because I know the need, and I think this is a great thing for not just, people say it's the Qualicum Beach pool. It's not. It's an RDN pool in Qualicum Beach. So with that, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Obviously, we all attended UBCM, and I won't go over everything because that would take about 10 minutes, and that's just a waste of your time. But there were a few questions I asked on specific things, one of which is, as with all the new housing legislation, we have housing need reports we're supposed to do, and one of the categories is people who are what are called core housing need. That's the folks who are spending way too much money, or their homes are in need of major repairs. And right now, there's no guidance from the province on what we have to do to meet that. But I sort of volunteered some of the folks at the BCMPHA to maybe look into providing some guidelines for local governments to say, here's what we recommend. You don't have to do it, but this is what we recommend you do. There was also I just want to highlight one thing. As a young man I met, I was talking to some folks from Fernie, and there was a young man who was a firefighter, and he was actually involved in the Jasper fire. And when the 24-year-old firefighter died, he was there, and that was one of his friends. So I got him in touch with a bunch of resources, passed that along. One of them, his colleagues, he was a youth counselor. He's now a student at UBC. He's a really lovely young guy. This is called Honor House, and this is for veterans, first responders. It provides basically like in a ranch setting, place for folks to get some supports. So I'll be dropping that off for staff if maybe someone at the fire department might need it one day. But there were a lot of really informative sessions that were held, so hats off to everyone who organized UBCM. There's also some work for the non-market task force. I'm putting myself in the position of maybe being a delegation for Parksville, which is slightly awkward. But they have an affordable housing project, so I just thought I'd share some of the information. I shared in June. And beyond that, I guess just the two notice of motions. The first one for number A, not to read it out, but it's there on your agenda. This was when we had a VIM-Qs meeting. So this is about talking about the island-wide murder unit, essentially. And there was a superintendent who's basically 3 ranks above our staff sergeant, Travis DeCoyne. And I asked him, how could we help you fight the opioid crisis? And this is one of the 2 things he said is track the precursors, the drugs you make fentanyl with, track them and share that with RCMP and law enforcement. So I'm assuming that the case is still that they don't. If they do, my apologies for getting it wrong. But that's just a notice of motion, and I just moved that.
Thank you, and I would second it, but there was also a suggestion that this resolution would be forwarded to AVICC to start with.
Correct.
And later UBCM.
I think that's correct.
Friendly amendment to add that?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I just have a little bit of an issue, be it resolved that the province work. I just don't know that we can tell the province what they are going to do. It would be nice if we could. So I wondered if it would be better to say that AVICC and or UBCM ask the province or lobby the province or whatever it needs to be.
Well, we just, as you said, came back from UBCM, and I think we had about 264 resolutions. Most of them were about telling the government what to do. And that doesn't mean they're going to do it, but we're saying that you should. And so I don't think this is any different, that we basically draw their attention to it and that the province work with them. Whether they do is their choice. But I think the wording is fine because that's what I see all the time on all those resolutions we just discussed a couple of weeks ago. Councillor Harrison.
And Councillor Skipsey does have an excellent point, but I'm scarred from my first term where I tried to get a resolution to have demographics included in the Canada Health Transfer Funds. And because it said AVICC specifically, they rejected it at UBCM, then it had to go back to AVICC, and then off that. And it was like a year delay. So that's why I'm leaving the associations out of it in this. But you are right, like technically you should do that. I just worry that if I put that in, it'll create another headache. The other thing too is that when we submit this to the resolutions committee, we can ask for feedback.
Yeah.
And if they have a helpful suggestion saying, we think you should word it this way, this time, if this passes, I would actually be doing that proactively, so there's no headaches for anyone, but they might actually agree with you precisely.
Yeah, and the executive will vet this, and if there's a change required, they will do that. So the resolution includes that it be forwarded to the AVICC and UBCM during their conventions. Okay? Ms. Coates, is that all right? Yeah, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Further discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And you have another one, Councillor.
And the second one, when I submitted this, was back in July, late July, and I wasn't aware that staff had a scoping sheet, but staff have a scoping sheet for this, basically. And it's just looking at the intersection we've been talking about for the past several months. So the only reason I wouldn't withdraw it is that I just think that it's good to keep that sort of in the list for strategic planning. And the staff recommendation that it's referred to strategic planning, if we want, we could do a separate resolution just to refer this to strategic planning, maybe as a resolution instead. Would that be appropriate? Just through the chair to Ms. Varela.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So there are actually two related scoping sheets that are already prepared. If at strategic planning, council feels that those don't actually fit the scope of the intention, you can amend there, and staff can also share those draft scoping sheets with you in advance to see if you see a gap, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much. I doubt I'll find a gap, to be perfectly candid. But I think at the same time, if we just want to make a motion to refer this resolution to strategic planning, I think that would just take care of it. And then council isn't bound in strategic planning to do exactly that.
Okay, so your motion is not what you've written, but that this issue be referred to the strategic planning.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. So that's a new motion. I'll second that. Now, we had a motion that was seconded. Do we have to, can we withdraw that, Ms. Coates, or how would you like to proceed with that?
Sorry, we didn't have a recorded motion on the floor.
Good. That's fine, then we're good.
So I understood it was just the item being referred.
That'd be referred to strategic planning, and that's been seconded. Further discussion? Councillor Skip. Oh, all. Okay. Okay. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Harrison.
And I think that's everything, so I'll pass on to Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I'm going to do it in the opposite order, so I'm going to start with the ones on the agenda and then get into my report. So the Select Committee on Environment and Sustainability actually reviewed the matter of the Food Action Plan strategic initiative at a couple of our meetings, and there was a lot of discussion. And it was felt that the items that were listed here did not necessarily fit what they envisioned a food action plan would include. And also they had there was some disagreements, I guess, around whether or not it was the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, the processing of food. So anyways, so the committee put forward a motion that asking council withdraw the May 3rd, 2023 motion as listed here. And I would so move.
That and seconded. Councillor Vander Valk, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay. And then, so arising out of that, there was talk about the terms of reference. So I would like to move that consideration of the terms of reference for the Select Committee on the Environment and Sustainability be referred to the Committee and Commission Terms of Reference Review Strategic Initiative, budgeted and planned for in 2025.
Seconding, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Please proceed.
Okay. And then these were the items that the committee felt would be important to consider when developing a food action plan. So I would like to move that the considerations for the 2026 Food Action Plan Strategic Initiative as proposed by the Environment and Sustainability Committee be referred to the 2026 strategic planning process to be held in the fall of 2025.
Thank you. That's exactly what's on the screen. So seconding, Councillor Harrison, discussion? All in favor? Oh, you have discussion. Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to say, rather than referring it to later, why can't it be action now?
Well, I think staff may have a comment about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the cutoff for bringing new initiatives forward for strategic planning has passed quite a few weeks ago. We do have a very robust list before Council. Again, staff take direction from Council, so if you decided to adjust, but we do set those deadlines for I think we're working on 34 scoping sheets right now.
Okay, so that's the reason why. Further discussion, Councillor Harrison.
And I do think too, just to the point for staff, that unless you have an open field, if you have ALR land that's forested, there's actually a lot of trade-offs environmentally with expanding food production. So that's something that actually requires a lot of analysis, and it's not something you just say pave it all, cut it all down, clear it all out, and let her rip. So I do think that this is something that would be a lot of staff preparation to look at this long list. This is actually, as a data nerd, this is a lot of stuff. So it's fair to have a sense of the scope for staff responsibility to prepare the information appropriately.
Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. And apparently, if you use artificial intelligence, you can get a list of everything that you need in a food action plan, and it's quite robust, but that's another story. And then the plant-based treaty, I don't think there's any action then required on that. And the select committee had, of Beach Day, had requested that council approve installation of permanent bicycle racks, and that's going to strategic planning, I believe, so no action there. I did want to just mention a few highlights for me from UBCM, and I would say one of those was our meeting with the staff from Island Health, and I think that was very productive. Also attending the mid-size community forum, where we learned about innovative ways that Williams Lake is providing power for and lowering operating costs for the recreation centers. That, of course, interested me. And also I connected with a councillor from Saanich regarding the use of road murals to slow traffic flow. So I know that information has been passed along to staff as well. I wanted to mention that yesterday I attended the RDN Solid Waste Committee meeting, and as of January 1st, 2025, all businesses, multifamily residences, and institutions will be required to separate their waste. And I know that, like at a big dumpster, if the waste haulers were to pick that up and there were compostables or recyclables in that waste, they would be penalized and they would run the risk of losing their license, their waste hauler license. So they're going to be taking this very seriously. I know it might be a big ask for some of our smaller businesses, and I wondered, I'm just going to put it out there, whether it might be something that the chamber would be willing to help coordinate or assist businesses in setting up. I just thought I would mention that. Also, let's see. Okay, arising from the minutes and the presentation from the delegation from the MABRRI and BC Nature, to use their funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada to conduct case studies and site analysis on the 5 sites within the town to determine alignment with the assessment screening criteria and eligibility to designate as OECMs and/or protected areas. So they very graciously have made an offer to do this work for the town. It would involve, I think, 2 hours of staff time for each of the 5 sites. And I would like to move that consideration of this offer be referred to Council's upcoming strategic planning. We do already, I believe, have a scoping sheet for OECMs. It was considered last year but moved out. With the caveat that if someone came along and wanted to do all the heavy lifting and pay for it and whatnot, that we would reconsider it sooner. So that would be my motion, that we refer this matter to the upcoming strategic planning.
Ms. Varela, any comments regarding what was decided before?
Thank you, Your Worship. That item has been flagged for being brought forward, so we are within the timelines as requested by staff. Thank you
Good.
so much.
So I just need a seconder. Councillor Vander, further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Councillor Harrison, you wanted to make a comment?
Oh, yeah, just one point. Just for the multifamily thing, sorry to interrupt, but I live in a multifamily building and we have bears. So we used to have a separate composting thing outside, but because of the bears, we had to basically not have that outside anymore. So I just think that when the RDN looks at enforcement, you might want to have a conversation if someone's violating the composting specifically. If there's a bear-related concern, there might be you might want to have something like if you can provide some sort of evidence that bears were around, just because I'm not sure what we've done with our composting. We don't have it outside anymore. It's been about a year and a half, sorry. But just a little thing for our area with bears being present everywhere.
I'm sure there will be quite a few wrinkles to iron out once that's introduced. I did want to mention on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I participated in a talking circle as part of Culture Days that was held at the Berwick for Canadians, and it was quite interesting. There was quite a good turnout of people there, and I'd like to finish by acknowledging that the Shady Rest is celebrating 100 years in business, and I think it would be nice if the town were to congratulate the establishment on this important milestones. And if this needs to be a notice of motion, I could do that, or I would move that council direct staff to prepare a letter of congratulations to the Shady Rest for an incredible 100 years of business in our community.
Council would be okay to make that motion at this time. Councillor Harrison seconding, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Vander Valk.
Thank you. Well, I don't have much to add to my written report.
You're doing that so well. Thank you.
But I just wanted to say regarding the UBCM convention, it actually was my first convention because I was ill last year and missed it. And I very much enjoyed it and learned from it. And one of the main things that I appreciated was our beautiful town, because we discussed so many towns that had such dire problems, fires, flooding, troubles with funding, more than our troubles with funding. And it just made me appreciate our community and realize, as I hope all of you do, that we live in a we're very fortunate to live in this community. And I just wanted to share my appreciation of the community and of our town. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Vander Valk, and I commend you for always putting in a report on time as to things you've been busy with. Appreciate that. Councillor Young.
I think we should clap on appreciating our community anyways. But as your liaison for arts and culture, it is the month of October is Library Month, and it is the only thing that is still free amidst all the other rising costs. And just want to spread the word to how you can lean on your library to learn, to connect, and save money. Just going to list about 10 things that they offer: free Wi-Fi, stream movies, listen to music, read e-books and e-audiobooks, get video games, get a digital magazine or newspaper, find entertainment for kids, get free seeds and gardening tips, get insurance discounts, and some complimentary legal assistant, and also use a meeting space. So it's Library Month. Everybody take out a library card if you don't have one. Also, I am a liaison to the Tosh, our local art gallery, and again, it's about membership. Membership to Tosh is awesome. When you become a member, you get to showcase your work in the members exhibition and join a vibrant community of artists. Whether you're new or established, you'll find support, collaboration, and creative inspiration in a culture that values artistic expression. The recent exhibition is called Archipelago. It's an Island of Self exhibition, and it's on till November the 2nd. And so check that out. And also for any other new events that's happening with Tosh, it's always good to check on Instagram. They're always constantly posting. Also, I'd like to have a shout out to the Qualicum Beach Rotary is now again selling their raffle tickets this year. And they're out there to support our community. So spend $10 on a ticket and you could win. I just want to mention they did support our local Qualicum Beach skateboarders in doing their new retrofit of, they gave $50,000 from the Qualicum Beach Rotary. They also gave $4,000 to the pickleball club that was hoping to fundraise. So they're there to support us, so let's support them in buying a raffle ticket. Also, yes, I appreciate it attending UPCM. Like Petronella, there's just so much that we gain from our just talking to other municipalities and what they're doing. And we have many things in common in regards to housing. And also, I just wanted to note that there was a resolution that was endorsed for helping with health clinics that were nonprofit, and so that would be something that would be good for Flowerstone Society if that was to be able to be welcomed by our province. And also for, I just want to thank Berwick for facilitating many public community events as part of Culture Days. Councillor Skipsey mentioned that she attended the talking circle. I attended the day before, and it was a conversation about blue ecology and how we can learn from our local Indigenous First Nation people of how they have always cherished the environment and how we can work together with them. So Google up blue ecology. It was a conversation that was hosted by Michael Blackstone at Berwick. And that's it.
Thank you. And if you want to see the history of Truth and Reconciliation, the museum did a super job, in my opinion, on explaining that and presenting it to the public. I went there on Truth and Reconciliation Day, and I met the artist who designed actually the T-shirt. So it's a good visit to make, and just by donation. Thank you. Next item, staff reports. Corporate services. Ms. Coates?
Thank you. Yes, I think the report is self-explanatory, but staff are happy to answer any questions. The report lays out what you're required to do under the Act and what you're required to do under the bylaw, unless Council directs an amendment to the bylaw. The change that you will note in the calendar is moving the open house to the first Monday of the month, scheduling tentatively the Wednesday, first Wednesday, sometimes the second Wednesday, to be available for special council meetings if required. And then the regular council on Wednesdays is required, mostly once a month. I think in October we have 2. And then providing committee of the whole meetings, which are usually held at 10 a.m. However, if they are public information sessions, for example, like the airport, public safety, or transportation, we've scheduled those for 4 p.m. So this is the tentative schedule we're providing for council. As an information item, we've also listed as attachment 2, the current committees of council and boards and commissions and what their schedule is in accordance with their terms of reference or what they have established if it's not in their terms of reference or bylaw. And we have a detailed calendar if there's any questions about whether there's any overlap or not. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Coates. Any questions regarding the calendar? Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, forgive me, just one small question on the bottom right corner of the calendar. I think it's the second last cell. But I thought for some reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff can correct me if I'm mistaken on this, I thought for the airport meetings we were doing 2 in the first year and then 1 a year afterwards. That was
the
my
plan.
understanding. And I see 2 in next year, so I'm just curious if my memory is off.
Well, staff were working from the motions that we had on the books, and the first motion was for 2, and it said a second one in the first year. It didn't say in the first year, but it said a second one for 2024. And council recently decided to have that one for sure in December, but it didn't make any reference to what you would do in the second year. Absolutely, it's up to council if you wish to drop one of those airport meetings. Thanks.
Yeah, so that was the idea. If we felt we needed it, we would continue, but we'll see how it goes the first year.
And the other thing too, just to the mayor's point, we can change the schedule at a later date. We don't have to, we're not bound by a decision today for the next year, so.
No, many of these meetings are as required, if required. So with that, could I have a motion to approve the schedule? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And then you have the rental subsidies. There's 2 there. I think they speak for themselves. For the Qualicum CD Saturday and 1 for the Echo Players. Could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And then special event. There's a significant event happening, and there was some confusion about who is the lead, but I think there's now consent between the Chamber of Commerce and the Farmers Market to host their events both on Moonlight Madness. So, Councillor Vander, you work with you work with these groups. Any comment?
No, I don't.
You have to make a motion?
Worked it up. I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Young. Discussion. All in favor? Go ahead. Go ahead.
There was a business meeting regarding the Moonlight Madness, and also it went back to the afternoon of Halloween trick-or-treating. And again, they're saying, can we close 2nd Avenue from Jones for the safety of the seniors and the children on those 2 events?
No, this is out of order. We're dealing with the Moonlight Madness event.
Okay, the Moonlight Madness then.
Yeah. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you.
To close the street?
Yeah,
on Moonlight Madness?
that's all part of it, yeah.
Are you guys going to be in favor of that?
Yeah, I think that's the question I asked, if they're in favor of the motion as presented by the staff recommendation, right? That's what I thought we just voted on.
Well, I think there had been a request to close all of 2nd Avenue, and the motion does not include that. So I think
That's right.
Councillor Young was raising that as something she would like to consider.
Okay. Ms. Vander, sorry, Ms. Varela?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. So if staff could just scroll down a bit to see the concerns about the extensive road closures that were originally requested. We have identified several safety concerns regarding the full closure of 2nd Avenue, and the text is before council there. So we aren't recommending that for the reasons displayed.
Right. And that's the motion we voted on, not the entire 2nd Avenue. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Did we vote on that? Did we vote on that resolution? We did. Thank you. Announcement of a closed council meeting. Ms. Coates, anything you want to mention? Okay, it speaks for itself. That's just an announcement. Finance, Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think our next item here is the asset management plan, and Paul Murray from Brentwood Advisory Group will be presenting, and he has a presentation for us on the asset replacement strategy.
Thank you. Mr. Murray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. The asset replacement financial strategy is a presentation to introduce the model to you. There are 3 scenarios that are included in the model you'll see as we get towards the end. It's presented for introduction and I understand will be considered at a future future council meeting. So no actions needed today, but we'll have a series of next steps at the end for you to consider. Thank you. So a little bit of background and recap. We'll talk about the strategy and opportunity for questions at the end. As you know, you've got a substantial amount of assets that the organization looks after on behalf of the community. Their current replacement cost is about $360 million, give or take. You can see 109 kilometers of paved roads, similar kilometers of water mains, a lot of sewer maintenance holes, 46 buildings, 40 kilometers of open ditch drainage, 20 kilometers of sidewalks. So there's several thousand individual asset records that are built into the model. So the approach we take for this is the Asset Management BC recommended and current best practice approach. I think you've seen it before. It's the nice colored wheel that talks about assess, plan, and implement. And then, in a few years' time, maybe you reassess, you replan, and you re-implement again. Town's currently moving, we're just at the end of the plan stage and into the implement stage now. We're going from the yellow to the green. Some of the work that's been done, you'll see over the last 3 or 4 years, primarily in this past year, we've been updating data. We've looked at replacement costs again. We've built a high-level risk profile, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And we've calculated funding demand and figured out 3 scenarios for you to consider that balances risk with cost to the community, culminating in the council presentation today. A broader concept is moving from, as communities across the province have been doing for many years now, moving from just a very strict let's keep taxes low without considering anything else to let's keep our assets healthy for the future while considering affordability. The model that we use is kind of very similar to the Asset Management BC approach. The top right half of the pie you can see is where we've worked in the past year or so, year or 2 years, compiling data, figuring about risk and level of service, calculating a funding demand, and then figuring out a replacement budget. Then we consider resiliency, flexibility, and affordability, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes, to arrive at a financial strategy, and that's what we're here today to present to you. There's 3 scenarios for you to choose between when you decide to move forward with the financial strategy. So your assets today, we use a health score to identify or give you something to look at as a condition indicator, a very high level, very broad level. So your assets are in very good shape currently. What we would call 88%, 90%. That's a combination of looking at the amount of your assets or the proportion of your assets that are beyond their useful life. So if if a pipe you were expecting to be 60 years standard engineering useful life and it's beyond that, that would be called past life. Consumption is also just a broad indicator of how much your system as a whole, all of your assets as a whole, are used up. So how far through their useful life are you? And that's a combined number for everything. So 50%, pretty average. You'd like to keep it, kind of in that mid-range. Model we use to kind of visualize this, it's a bucket. So the rate of investment is the amount of money that from property taxes that you're contributing to replace assets each year. Currently, that's about 2.5 million. The health score is a description of the bucket. The empty part of the bucket is how much of your assets are consumed. Past life is the red part. That's where we're getting beyond our useful life, where they're beyond the standard engineering number of years for that particular asset. And the rate of deterioration is, again, how much they're being consumed. It's depreciation. It's how much they're wearing out. So the question is, for consideration in developing the strategy, we're at an 88 today. Where would we like to be over the 30-year planning period of the model? Do you want the same, or would you like to take a little more risk and reduce? A little bit less cost, a little more risk. So it's all a balance about risk and cost. Risk and level of service, you can see what that translates to as condition of your assets. Some are better than others, depending on how much you maintain them and how you replace them. You can see an example. A is a pretty good one. Some of the others not quite so good. And it's just a visual to show you there's a combination or a connection between cost and risk and level of service. These are not in town. I specifically chose not in town. They could be though, but not in town, no. So the status quo currently, we wanted to point out that if you kept your funding level at $2.5 million, so you didn't increase it in the future, your health score is gradually going to drop from 88 down to a 30, which means about 30%, 32% of your assets would be beyond their useful life, highest risk, and you're about 90% consumed. So that's if you kept your dollars the same. We've got 3 other scenarios we'll talk about through the model. 1, 2, and 3, which is, 1 is to keep risk and level of service similar, and we need to increase the annual consumption or annual dollars up for that. Second one is take a little bit more risk. You can see past life would increase to about 15% or no more than. And the third one is to take a little more risk again, past life no more than 20, 21%. Each one has a different annual cost attached to it. What that is the risk is based on a combination of past life maximum. So what we're saying here is the water system, we don't want to have any more than 5% of our water assets beyond their useful life at any time during the life of the model, the 30 years. So the maximum for water and sewer would be 5%. We'll take a little more risk in transportation, a little more in buildings, a little bit less in drainage, a little more in parks, a little more in equipment and vehicles for that particular scenario. That combination keeps you pretty consistent with today. The second one, you can see we're taking a little more risk in water and sewer because we'll allow a little more of the system to be past life than it is. And the same with the other categories. And again, in scenario 3, if you want to take a little more risk again, we increase the past life proportion that we're willing to accept. So what it means is right now on scenario 1, our risk and level of service are similar. Scenario 2, our risk goes up a little bit, our level of service likely goes down a bit because you have more potential for breaks and your assets won't be providing you as good a service as they could. And the same thing with scenario 3, take a little more risk. And of course, scenario 2 and 3 are less cost. So it's all about balancing cost and risk. So how are we going to fund this? So we go back to the model again, and we're really focused on the left-hand side now, which is the asset replacement financial strategy. And we want to consider resiliency, flexibility, and affordability as we build these scenarios for you. So what's resiliency? So resiliency is the ability to meet that desired level of service consistently over time. So we don't want instability where, from year to year, you're having breaks in assets, or you're not able to replace when you want to. We want to be as consistent as possible, so you're resilient. Flexibility is the extent to which we can use debt and reserves, so debt capacity, so we can use debt, still subject to the assent of the electors process and everything, but use that if need be for both planned replacements and unplanned ones, because you're always going to have something that's going to happen that you don't plan for. Just is. Can you withstand that, and do you have the capacity or the funding available to deal with those unplanned, whilst giving yourself room to regularly replace as well? If you can, that means you've got some pretty good flexibility. So we want to try and build that into the model as well. And affordability, the last one, what we want to do is consider the cost to the average homeowner as you do this. So you want to keep that in mind all the time. So first one, resiliency. Again, these are the 3 scenarios compared to status quo, not changing anything. And that's what we'll consider. And this is the funding levels needed to ensure we're resilient, can provide that level of service consistently over time. Flexibility. So we have planned asset replacement when we're you know, we're organized, we have your 5-year capital, we're planning in year 3 to replace a pipe in a particular neighborhood. The one on the right is when we don't and something breaks and we have to fix it, which is generally a little more costly than replacing it, you know, when we should. So what we think about in the model is how much reserves or cash do we want to have on hand for unplanned, and how much do we want to have in debt as well, in case we need to. Likely you won't have to, but you want to have that room set aside just in case. And we did some workshopping with staff, and if you think about it in terms of, you've got $360 million of assets. Your highest risk area is your assets that are currently past life, which is about 6%. So $22 million worth of assets are past their life now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some assets, you know, you may have a water pipe that's built in great ground conditions, it's lasting really well, you don't want to touch it. You check it once in a while and it's okay. That's perfectly fine. You may have some that are before their past life because they're in poor ground conditions, or the ground conditions have changed because of climate, whatever it is, and so the useful life may need to be shortened. So, but however, $22 million, what proportion of that do we feel comfortable having so that we can fix something that's unplanned? And we currently have about $3.9 million in replacement reserves, which is about 11% of that past life number. Feel pretty comfortable with that number for unplanned replacements, in combination with $1.82 million worth of debt room that we've assigned in the debt model that we have. So collectively, you've got $5.7, almost $6 million that in the model we want to maintain for unplanned, so that if something happens and you've got to go replace something, you can access that without having a significant budget impact. You've got to drop some other projects. You don't want to have that instability. So part of the flexibility piece is also the capacity for planned replacement. So we do that also by using debt capacity from time to time, because we know a lot of communities are very conservative about debt. Debt is actually a good bridging tool to use from time to time for this. And the cost of that debt is built into the model. So it's not a tax increase over and above every time you use debt. That's the key consideration. So again, in the model, we've got $2 million worth of debt capacity. So this isn't money that's borrowed already. It's just there in your statutory limit that you have provincially. So that's there in case you need it for unplanned replacements, and still subject to the assent of the electors process. We have just a $5 million pot left there for any kind of emergency. So we want to keep that room there just in case. Keep a significant amount of money there for new projects should you need that over the 30 years, because remember, we're thinking 30 years here, not just the next 1 or 2. And what that does, that means we've got $37 million left that we could use for asset replacement. We're not suggesting you use hardly any debt in this. We're just saying that in this case, you've got all kinds of room in your debt model from the province, your statutory debt limit. So not really a significant consideration here. Some communities that have borrowed a lot, what this does is it pushes you to be pay as you go in the model, which is more costly. So in this case, this is really good. We've got lots of room in the debt model, and what this would be done is, this would just be outlined in your debt policy, so that there's a little bit of discipline to maintain this room in the future. We had one client community where they were talking about building a new rec center, and it would use about 80% of their debt room, because it was a big expenditure for them. And we were able to show the impact that said, well, with your model now, but if you borrow for this new rec center additional, you're going to turn your asset management program into basically a cash program. And the cost increase would be this. And it was really good information for them to have when council was making the decision about that rec center. So the last part we want to consider when we do this is affordability. So current property taxes and utility charges to a typical home, just over $3,300. Of that, $530 is for capital replacement. This is what we're talking about today. And the balance of $2,831 is for everything else the municipality provides. That's policing, that's parks, that's operations, road maintenance, all of those different things. So you can see the split there. It's about $2,500 in property taxes, $645 in water charges, and just over $200 in sewer charges. And you can see the breakdown. In general, property taxes is about $234 for capital, and the balance for operations. Water, again, just over $200 for capital, just over $400 for operations. And sewer, about $72 for capital and $147 for operations. So what are the scenarios, the three scenarios? Before we do that, just a couple of quick reminders. The plan or the model is based on like-for-like replacement. So it does not anticipate, changing a road from single lane to 2-lane or 2 to 4 or adding sidewalks where there weren't before, et cetera. Those are incremental changes that you would add on as well over time. Constant dollar analysis, so over the 30 years of the plan, we don't build inflation in. The concept with the model is that it becomes part of your regular budget cycle every year. Your replacement costs are updated every year, and your numbers change each year. And so, guessing at inflation 30 years out, we don't think is really a great idea. So we'd much rather have the discipline of updating it every year. You get a much better idea. And lastly, the assets. Your assets. These are the ones that are included. It does not include the regional assets for regional sewer treatment, the rec center, et cetera. Those are managed through the regional district. Just a reminder too, remember we just talked about this, we want to think about affordability and resiliency, and then the flexibility to replace assets when they're unplanned and when they're both planned. Back to the three models again. Scenario 1 requires an increase in cost or contribution towards asset replacement from property taxes from 2.5 up to 5.7 million per year. And that's based on the risk model we talked about before, which really keeps your assets below that 4 or 5% past life threshold and keeps your consumption levels down reasonably well. Scenario 2, we prioritize risk a little more. We increase a little bit in a couple places. So your overall risk profile goes up to about 15%, 14, 15. And by doing that, we reduce the cost per year that you would need to build to contribute. $4.7 million there. And again, if we go up a little further to 20%, 21%, we can reduce the annual cost down to about 3.9 million. So now we get to the good stuff. So what's the cost of each scenario? So this is scenario 1, the first one, the most expensive one. And what it takes over 15, this is all based on a 15-year plan to increase that spending. So it's not, we have to increase it next year. This is about how do we increase that spending over 15 years while keeping those risk profiles within those limits we talked about. So property taxes, about a $39 a year increase each year, which is about a 1.3% property tax increase today. $14 a year on water, about 1.7% a year, and $13 a year in sewer, which is about 3.9%. Percent looks a little higher. The dollars are quite consistent because it's a small sewer base you're starting from. So overall, you're at $530 today, contributed from the average home towards infrastructure replacement. Needs to go up to $1,538 in the future over time, over 15 years. So the second scenario, if we take a little more risk, you can see it's a little less cost. $31 a year in property taxes, about 1% property tax increase a year. Just under 1% for water, or $6, and 3% a year for sewer, or $9. So you're going up from $530 to $1,231 instead of $1,500 or so in this scenario. And scenario 3, the last one, again, a little bit less. General capital is very similar to the previous one. It's around about 1%. It's $29 a year. Water capital is good. in this scenario, we're taking a little more risk, so you don't need to increase water any more than you are currently. Sewer capital is, again, we're taking a little more risk there, so the increase drops to 1.3% per year, or $3 a year. So you're going from $530 up to $1,020 over 15 years. So just in summary, you can see scenario 1 in total is about $66 a year over 15 years. Scenario 2 is $46 a year. Scenario 3 is $32 a year. So it gives you a range of cost versus the risk. And in each of them, we're using a fairly small proportion of debt capacity, and only if that's needed occasionally. So if you have quite a large project that you want to maintain, you don't want to drop your reserves below that minimal level for flexibility, so you might borrow in that case. So overall, cost increase for typical home ranges between $33 and $66 a year. Annual property tax increases range between $29 and $39 a year. Water between 0 and 14, and sewer between 3 and 13 a year. Remember, this is just for like assets, not new or for operations. Inflation needs to be considered each year as it's updated. And as you add new capital projects, remember, if you're adding to your inventory, you're going to increase your funding demand for future replacement. And that will be taken into account every year as your asset inventory is updated. So if you add another fire station or a rec center, or conversely, if you reduce some buildings, for example, you can actually reduce your funding demand in the future. If you decide some of the assets you have are surplus and you don't need them, or you're going to do something different with them, then that would affect this one way or the other and be taken into account the next year when it's updated. What we like about this is it's an integrated, balanced approach. It creates alignment between risk and cost, so you get to pick and you get to manage each year. It's a living strategy. It's meant to be updated every year. It's not a plan that you put aside for 10 years and come back and have a huge increase again. It's a guide, not a bylaw, so it's meant to be informative for staff. Council still has the choice in budget each year on how you action that. So if you pick a scenario when this comes back to council at a future date, that's informative for staff, and that's how they would build the budget. You still get to consider budget at that point and adjust. And you can always change the scenario in a future year as well. If you're finding that, maybe you'd like to take a little more risk, or maybe things are changing and you want to take a little bit less, you adjust. I wouldn't suggest you change the model every year, but it certainly you can change it. What we like is as I say, it provides this frame of reference for decision making by council each year during the budget. So next steps, council indication of the scenario that you're comfortable with staff using for budget preparation. Not needed today, but at some point staff will need that in order to begin building it in. Once they have that, they'll build that approach into the draft, hopefully 2025 financial plan for council consideration during the budget process. They'll also begin building a reporting and measurement framework, because part of this is you want to bring it forward to council and the community each year, just as part of budget. So you would see not this level of detail, but an update from staff to say, here's how replacement costs have increased, here's our asset inventory has changed. Based on the risk level, we think the path we're on with this $39 increase or $66 increase is good, and we suggest that we do the same again this year, or we suggest an adjustment. So you operationalize it, and we measure and we report out. And you report out through the annual budget, through the annual report, and connect it with your strategic planning. So you have that context when you're thinking about your strategic initiatives as well. Staff will continue to refine and ground truth the data, and hopefully do that annually. So if, for example, we've done some video work of some pipes, and that video work tells us that this area is doing really well, maybe we adjust the service life in this area. This area not so good, maybe we adjust it there. So you're making it more accurate over time from field experience. And we know we'll focus on, I think, airport assets and buildings would be the probably the first areas that staff would be doing some work on in the future. Council, if there's some direction for staff on a scenario, Council can expect that the first report and update of the strategy will be included in the 2025, possibly the 26 budget process. And that's the presentation, Mr. Mayor. Any questions?
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So just through the chair, one of the neat things about Qualicum Beach is that basically for over a 10 to 15 year period, that's when more than half the town was built. So that's the mid-70s to the right around 1990. So if you look in the census, about 56% of homes were built in the 80s. So a lot of our sewer and water is going to come up for end of life at the exact same time. So just as we're planning this, one of my concerns, I'm going off a earlier presentation I believe Mr. Weir gave us about 6 or 9 months ago. And that was the one data point that stuck with me, is that everything was ending at one couple-year window. So when we're doing this, I mean, obviously we're saving up more for the future, but is this something where we're having that conversation of there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done right around this 5-year period, and that's something we should be planning for?
Thank you.
Through the Mayor to Council, absolutely. Very similar to a lot of communities. I think there was, we know there's a significant boom around the province at that time, not only just Qualicum Beach. And yes, that's built into the model because the service life for each of those individual pieces would be reflective of the time it was constructed. And so from a standard engineering life basis, those assets will be coming due all at the same time. I would argue that they're not necessarily all due then, because when you ground truth that with field information, you may find, but it may only be 5 years either side. So in effect, it's roughly all the same time. That's why I talked about having debt capacity, because if you need to bridge with if you have to do a significant amount of asset replacement at the same time, then you can bridge with debt. That's built into the model, because I know folks always associate that with an increase in property taxes, because usually it's just an exceptional event. You don't borrow very often. What we're talking about here is trying to make that a little more of a normal bridging event that's built into those 15-year increases that we've been talking about. And it gets ground truth every year. So I would hope that your staff would be building up that knowledge base, doing some video work, doing some groundwork, and really refining that. And you'll see that come forward in your 5-year capital budget each year. And as you get a little closer, I'm sure staff will start to give you hints that there's a bulge coming, and then we've got to make sure that the model ties in with that. And that's what it's certainly intended to do. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll get a hard copy of this at a future council meeting when we do our budgeting process, and with a recommendation of where we can go with this. The one thing that I thought I would like to ask about, you didn't seem to calculate any grant opportunity. We just replaced, or we are replacing a major culvert on East Crescent, and I think we had a grant of 1.6 million, something like that. So there's grant money available too. It's not always that it has to come from taxes. And over the years, I think Qualicum Beach has been very successful in getting significant grants, 2/3 grants for the ring roads, for the water tower, or water reservoir, and many other projects that I'm aware of where we were successful in getting grants because we have a plan. Staff has been over the years very good in saying this is coming down the pike and we need to apply for grant funding. So it wasn't that we're in a panic trying to get the grant monies, we were preparing in advance. And also anting up our own reserve to, if we don't get the grant, we have to do it, or at least pay our share of it. So overall, I think the presentation is good, but it would be helpful for both the public and council to have a hard copy whenever this comes up at a council meeting for us to make a decision on. Can I go for Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey?
Thank you. I just had a similar kind of thing, a question, because I wasn't sure how the model incorporates infill growth or like the DCCs that are paid that would help upgrade some of that infrastructure.
Absolutely. Through the chair, through the mayor, the model does not incorporate growth. That's where we say it's like for like. So it's replacing a 6-inch pipe with a 6-inch pipe. And so the replacement cost is based on the cost to replace existing. So when you consider, and your development cost charges are paid by development to fund the proportion, right, that's related to growth, not, so that would be layered on top. So if you, for example, needed to replace and that pipe needed to be 8-inch instead of 6 or something a little different, you have to bring those two parts together. And if the development funding is not sufficient, then you need to look at some additional sources, and that may be where there's a grant. It may be that you just have to work that out in your budget. But this model, generally the approach is to replace like with like. What that does is it gives you the discipline of really understanding what the impact of growth is, because quite often it can get mixed in, and you don't really see what the real cost of growth is. So I think that'll bring some clarity to that in the future as the model gets built out into your budgeting process. And that's one of the reasons why we don't suggest incorporating grants in automatically, because they're not guaranteed. As you know, you can be very successful at it, and the good news is as you do that, that will only improve your situation. It's very easy to build grants in and assume your problem away, and then you don't increase your funding, and if you don't get the grants, you're in a worse position. So we'd always suggest you have the financial discipline to keep doing that. Don't assume grants, but still apply for them all, and every chance you get, and then it'll get reported in the next year through the budget process on how you're doing. Just like you've been very successful with airport, getting grant funding for some asset replacement there. So it's all very positive. We're just saying a little bit of discipline, don't assume grants, and it'll put you in a much better place by doing that.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I just remember BC Stats used to have these census data things, and I always remember the one for Qualicum Beach says in the 80s we were the second fastest growing small community behind Whistler, which seems odd today, but back then we were. So my question is more for Mr. Hare. So if we're going to be saving up for what we know is going to be a lot of work for our asset replacement, is there a way we can essentially store money we're saving up now to make sure it's not like a statutory reserve, where if we replace it all, we then have to replenish that reserve? So I'm just thinking like how we store money in the interim to get ready for this. And it's not going into a statutory reserve where we'd have to replenish it right away if we spend the money for a lot of work in town.
I'm going to let Paul answer that on my behalf. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, through to council, we actually would use a statutory reserve, but we are actually replenishing it every year, because the $2.5 million money that comes from property taxes goes into that reserve every year, and then the amount we take out is dependent on your 5-year capital plan. So technically you are actually replenishing. So and that's where we talk about it needs to be a living plan. And so it's not a mechanical calculation of you have to replenish within 3 years, et cetera, that's established by statute. It's a living reserve. I'm sure the funds in there will be invested as staff do with the MFA or through whatever investment vehicles you use, but that reserve is basically a conduit for money in and out every year, and then you supplement it with debt. If you're going to drop below that minimum number we talked about for flexibility, you don't want to go below that and keep that for unplanned things. If you're going to go there and you get a big bulge of replacement you were talking about, then you might need to go for debt. Or you spread out that replacement over a few years, depending on how much money you're putting into reserve each year. So I think it all works quite nicely.
And with all of that, we rely heavily on staff recommendations. We don't look at pipes. We don't measure how solid the base of a road is, but we know we have good people that will tell us this is what's coming up and you need to prepare for that. So thank you for the presentation, and we'll get it back in hard copy when we need to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Water utility, who would like to touch on that? It's under finance. Mr. Hare?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the memo in front of you is actually requesting a reallocation of $30,000 from the Rupert Road water looping project. to address a replacement of leaking water valves, which are underneath a community, underneath the, basically a project that is being done for replacement of a crosswalk or addition of a safety crosswalk.
If there's no questions, can I have a motion to effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Planning, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The first item under planning today is consideration of a development variance permit for a property at 361 Poplar Avenue. This is an application that was considered at the previous council meeting, and council did authorize staff to provide notice to adjacent residences. So the slide before you shows the general context and location of the site in the upper right of the slide we're looking at. So it is on Poplar Avenue. It's in a portion of Poplar that's a narrow roadway, so it is more narrow than typical road statutory right-of-ways in the town. The other unique aspect of this particular property is highlighted in the image to the lower left, in that the vehicular access to this property actually comes from the east, not directly from the portion of Poplar that's directly in front of it. There's an easement over the adjacent property that allows for this continuing access, because at the time that this configuration was established, it was all one property. So, next slide. Specifically, the variance that has been requested is an increase in maximum height from 4.5 meters to 4.8 meters, and a decrease in the minimum front yard setback from 6 meters to 1.5 meters. If you've been to the site, you'd note that the slope of the ground actually drops off rather quickly from Poplar Avenue, so the increase in height is relatively minor. It wouldn't be particularly noticeable from the road. The front yard setback, staff do also feel it's reasonable to consider this relaxation in setback because of the fact that the property is actually vehicular access is from the side, not from the front. So with that, the recommendation is to authorize the development variance permit. However, if council wishes to hear comments from the public, then that would be subject to public input. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was no written input on this council staff?
Yes, there was one letter received. It's in the binder. It was in support.
Yeah. So anyone in the gallery would like to speak to this? Okay, council, and a motion would be appropriate. Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey, to approve this development permit. Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
I just have one question. I'm fine with all the setbacks and whatnot, but I just wondered about the driveway. So will the driveway be moved under this proposal?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. The driveway access would remain in the same location, and so that they could come into the garage sideways.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Sales. And the next one.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item for consideration is a development permit application for 149 First Avenue West. This is the first consideration by council of this application. Next slide. This application is very close to the town hall. You would basically go across Primrose Street, and it is on the north side of First Avenue. It's a very narrow residential lot. I don't know the subdivision history of this, but it's significantly less than the typical property width in the town, so it's very unique, and the application proposed before you is also relatively unique. This is currently proposed as a fourplex, so there'd be 4 dwelling units in this configuration. When this discussion first happened and the property owner was interested in doing this, it was before the province's new housing legislation. So at the time, they were actually considering exactly this, but they would have required a zoning amendment because the zoning at the time only permitted 1 dwelling unit and 1 suite. However, with the province's new legislation, the requirement was that we increase that to allow for 4 dwelling units on this property. So because of that, the zoning does permit what's currently proposed in terms of the density. There is a minor setback variance that would need to be incorporated into the development permit. However, that's something that could be done through the development permit, not requiring a separate variance application. So that's the general context of this. A few things are unique, to this application that I think warrant discussion. First of all, because of the changes that the town has made in responding to the province's legislation, this is the first time that the town has considered the design guidelines that were developed in response to the province's applications. So they were tested extensively when the design guidelines were being developed, but this is the first time going through it with our actual application before us. So that's the primary reason that staff are recommending that this be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission to refer or to get a better understanding of how this actually is impacted by the design guidelines and whether it's compatible with the general direction that the town wants to consider. The second area that we would like the design guideline or the Advisory Planning Commission comment on, and if you could go back just a slide, I want to point a few things out. One more. Okay, so it is a very narrow lot, and there's 4 dwelling units, and they are proposing 4 parking spaces on the property. However, by providing driveway access on both the front and the back side of this property, then there will be curb cuts, right? And it essentially eliminates 2 parking spaces. So you're eliminating 2 parking spaces to provide 2 parking spaces on the property itself. So is that a net benefit to the neighborhood? Is that a benefit to the street? That's a trade-off that there's not a clear answer, right or wrong, and I think the Advisory Planning Commission would likely have some comments as to whether that access configuration is appropriate. So with that, the recommendation before Council today is that this application be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so I actually disagree with the staff recommendation for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm just looking at staff capacity. We're down to 2 planners. We have strategic planning in less than a month, and I'd rather have our planners spend time preparing for that than going over provincial legislation where we have no input as a town. We don't have a choice on the provincial legislation. It's hardwired. Secondly, even the variance they're requiring, I'm looking at the manual the province provided us. There's no mention of the cumulative input. I know the staff have recommended when we do the housekeeping, we'll get rid of it. But it's actually a 1.2 meter setback for a site of the same size, I believe, in the provincial regulations, not a 1.5. But they're complying with all the R1, the residential 1 setbacks. At the end of the day, it's 1.5 on each side. That's our setbacks that we have in our zoning bylaw. It's designated as infill for over 20 years in our OCP, long before all this provincial legislation came in. And there's one house in town where, if they were proposing it, I would like it to go to the APC that was recently built, which I shall not name. But this is broadly congruent from the renderings I see. It's got a peaked roof, it's denser. The last consideration too is that these are going to be really small units, which means they're going to be cheaper. And the more we spend time going over this with staff, that's going to be soft costs essentially that get passed on to the purchaser, because the staff who do that for the proponent takes time. I still think, though, that because we have something on the books for that cumulative setback issue, we should do the development variance permit process. I haven't seen any emails about this in my email folder. I checked this morning. So I'd suggest that we just do the statutory notification for a variance, and then in the next month, if anyone says, I have huge issues with this, then at that point we can refer it to the APC. But I think at the same time, we can sort of accelerate things if everyone's fine with it.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Providing statutory notice and going through the development variance permit wouldn't necessarily be a faster process, right? So in the scenario where we provide notice, receive input, and then decide whether to refer to the Advisory Planning Commission, that actually could be just as long or longer. So Mr. Harrison, or Councillor Harrison, raises a number of good points. It is absolutely, in line with the province's intended infill strategies. and so that's not the issue that would be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission. It's simply the town's design guidelines, and also to complement those design guidelines, how the town wants to handle the street frontages and parking configuration. So I think there's little doubt as to whether this general concept complies with the town's zoning and with the province's legislation. It's a matter of details. So if council does wish to expedite the review of this process or this file, we can certainly establish an Advisory Planning Commission meeting as soon as possible and have this back before council at the earliest date.
Can we do the notification and ABC review at the before the next council meeting?
Thank you. That would depend on the availability of the members of the Advisory Planning Commission, but generally they are very responsive. But I do want to make one point very clear. Because this is a development permit, not a development variance permit, there is no notice required. So that's when you decide between a development variance permit and a development permit, the development permit is actually the more efficient of the two processes. And so that's what staff is recommending.
So it wouldn't be out of line if we said we want to approve this development permit application.
That is a council, a potential decision of council today if you do wish to authorize the issuance of the development permit.
Thank you. The comment about how busy you are and reduced staff, can you give us some information about how that looked like?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So as noted by Councillor Harrison, we are down one position in the planning department right now because of a recent departure, and that hiring process is underway. And there is a lot of activity in the planning department. However, this is an important part of the review process. So, handling these types of applications in a time-sensitive way is just an essential part of the business that we do. And so it will be done. That's not a major concern. I think the question is more, what is the best way to approach the review of this application? And that's the recommendation before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vander.
Well, I actually agree with the staff recommendations. I think that, and it may be because I was more involved with the design guidelines, but I think that it's very important for us to respect and look at the design guidelines that have been approved and discussed before council previously. And I think this is a good example of testing those design guidelines that have been set up. And I agree that one of the important things that came up in those discussions is the streetscape. And this is a very good example of how we would like to see the streetscapes in town handled in future, and that's what those design guidelines were set up for. So I think that it should go to the APC for review. I also do have some concerns about if we're looking at not requiring parking in the front, should we perhaps still require the 4 parking stalls, even though that's may not be necessary to some people's minds. So I would like to also ask that the APC look at the site plan and how the building is situated on the site in general, if there's a possibility of moving the building forward a bit if there's no parking at the front, and seeing if parking would fit in the back. So I would like to add that to what the APC would be asked to look at. And also I have some concerns about the trees that are in the town-owned lane and what that would look like. There are no elevations or no drawings that show us the back of the building. So it would be helpful to have that and also to discuss, is there a possibility of working the lane so that not all the huge trees that are in the lane, which are in generally good health, I believe, that they would all have to be taken out. So I definitely would like to have this taken forward to the APC.
Would you like to make a motion to
would
that
like
effect?
to
We can
make-
still have more discussion afterwards, but it'd be good to have a motion on the table.
I would like to put
Move the staff
forward,
recommendation?
yes.
Thank you. Seconding? Councillor Skipsey, discussion.
Sorry, just for clarity, I understood there was a third bullet that was being added?
Yes, we can add some more bullets.
Yeah. So she made the motion with a third bullet?
Yes, site
So-
plan.
And how it is situated on the lot and parking in the rear?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's seconded. Further discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so I don't support that for several reasons. First of all, if we want to get angry comments, tell them that there are 2 units with no parking. That'll get some concern. I've already received letters for people when, I think it was Saanich was doing some of that, with no parking units in the big city.
yeah.
And folks said, you're not doing this in Qualicum Beach, right? And no, I don't think we are, thank you. I don't think public transportation here is active enough to make that work. Maybe Vancouver, maybe Montreal, not so much here. And I think the tax increase to make public transit work well enough, folks would be very, forgive me, you sit on the RDN, so you're probably aware how much we spend on transportation already. I do understand where staff is saying. The problem is it's such a narrow lot. I don't just see how that would work unless you basically have street parking. And then you have permanent street parking. If there's an event of any kind, now a homeowner can't park in front of their house. So that's one issue. The other thing too is that I'm just thinking, are staff familiar with the, so it was published, I think in August or September, the province's 20-year targets through the Housing Assessment Resource Team. I'm just wondering if staff have looked at that 20-year target. Because it's 2,031 over 20 years for Qualicum Beach, which is 101 a year. So I'm just thinking that we're not currently on track for 100 a year, forgive me, from what I can remember of our council meetings. So I just think something like this, which is smaller, more infill, that's designed for a different demographic, this is something we're supposed to do. And unless staff have a particular, there's a conflict with our design guidelines. If there's an existing conflict, then there's maybe a conversation, but I'm not familiar with a conflict in the report. So is there a conflict with our design guidelines at this point in time?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. Staff have not flagged any conflicts with the design guidelines.
Thank you. And street parking, I think the 3 units not quite in front of the back lane, but right off Harlech actually, they don't have on-site parking either. And we have the parade organizers there, there's traffic happening there. So that doesn't seem to be an issue there. And I think this motion asks us for input, advice. That's an advisory planning commission. They're not asking, we're not making a decision, we're asking for their input. So I'm okay with that. Let's see how this works. I like the projects from what I've seen, but I wouldn't mind getting some input as far as the guidelines and some of the other concerns you've raised. So I will support this motion for the discussion. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's an interesting proposal. I like the concept, and actually when I was living on the Lower Mainland, I lived in a space very similar to this, about the same size, and it was very livable and enjoyed living there. So I did have a question around stormwater. It sounded to me like maybe not all of it would be able to be dealt with on site, and I just wanted to clarify with that. And also the laneway, the way it is now, the way it's configured, so they'd have to kind of come past it and then come in, and I wondered if that, what the intention was to keep it as that laneway access instead of barging it right through.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. So I'll answer the second question first. So in terms of the vehicular access, it wouldn't be possible to go directly into this property and eliminate that landscaping, because that land is actually not owned by the town. It's owned by the the property that Mayor Westbrook referred to as not having any dedicated on-site parking. So they actually own a portion of that triangle. So that, if that's your concern, that won't be an issue. With regard to the stormwater management, that's not a level of detail that we've gotten to at this point, right? So that's usually taken care of not through the development permit process, but later on through the building permit process to ensure that there's adequate servicing on site for stormwater management, or in cases where it cannot be, to ensure that the adjacent stormwater network can handle the flows generated from the site.
Councillor, are you done? Councillor Harrison.
So just two questions. One, so if this is coming before council, it's a development permit which complies essentially with everything. In the future, would these sorts of projects be coming to council, or would this be handled more at the staff level?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The province's recommendation is that development permits of this nature that comply with the zoning would be handled at the staff level. So that's something that we will be bringing forward for council consideration in the future, which would potentially be an amendment to the officer and delegation bylaw. So yes, it's something to consider. It's not a requirement of the province, but it is their recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions? Are you ready for the vote? All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Harrison opposed. And Councillor Young opposed? Thank you. That carries. So next item is the pathway, and I think that's your bailiwick as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item on the agenda is a request for authorization to issue a request for proposals document. And I only have one slide up on the screen before you, but I thought it is important to provide a little bit of context for this project. So this is a project that the council authorized staff to apply for a grant, and that we were successful in securing that grant. So now we're moving forward with the next stage of the process. So what this essentially does is take steps towards the goals and objectives in the town's official community plan, in the sustainability plan portion of it. And I've just highlighted a few of the key points up here. So this is official community plan section 3.3.6. Just general objective is to develop an economy that delivers sustainable prosperity to the residents of Qualicum Beach. And there's some visionary principles, only a few of them I've listed here, but economic impacts are considered along with social and environmental concerns in the decision-making process. Legal, fiscal, and regulatory environmental supports and encourages new business. And then support for green, sustainable economy and local jobs for people of all ages and in multiple sectors. And this portion of the document actually lists a number of sectors that the town wants to explore as possible job opportunities for our residents. So the OCP articulates this general vision. You know, this is where we want to be in 2050. This is the long-term trajectory. But the town has never really taken steps to analyze, you know, which of those goals is feasible, you know, which of those sectors is actually appropriate to the local economy and the people. And then if we want to be pursuing those specifically, what would it actually take to get there? So this project kind of takes those really high-level goals and tries to translate them into things that the town can actually advance in discussions like the strategic planning process or in future bylaw and policy development. So the overall project is intended to result in a more actionable economic development strategy to help council make decisions, you know, with the information from this strategy, so that more informed decision making with regard to sustainable economic development. Be a little more specific, and we're, you know, obviously collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations in terms of business development and attraction. And then also, you know, what would a governance and staffing strategy look like to actually achieve these goals? What would collaboration look like with, for example, other economic development organizations that are associated with, say, Qualicum First Nation? You know, what types of collaboration and governance could we be working on there? So that's just a very brief summary of the overall project. Council has discussed this in a previous meeting. And the recommendation, if you just go to the next slide, is simply that the council authorizes staff to issue a request for proposals. Once those results come in, then council would be in a position to consider authorizing this project to proceed to implementation. So this will come back to council again after the results of that request for proposals have been received. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, or ready to make a motion? Councillor Vander.
I just had some questions based on the discussion that's in our agenda. On page 90, talks about the proposed first phase of the project would involve tourism and retail gap analysis. And I have some concerns, I guess would be the word. The Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association has done a very large study and have a plan for tourism in the Oceanside area. And I would wonder if there's a way that we can make sure that there's no overlap with their study, because their study is very in-depth and very informative. So that would be one of my concerns. And also when the proposal is, or the RFP is being made, I think that how the town presents the RFP also will influence the information that we get back. So I would like to add, rather than just tourism and retail gap, that perhaps there's an opportunity to look also at things like services. What services are there in the town currently, and what could we use more of? We have a lot of pharmacies and dentists right now, but maybe the other businesses that are service businesses that are lacking, could we include those in the RFP? And maybe even expanding the outlook a bit to also look at, are there businesses or manufacturing or production businesses that could be included in it? Because right now our big businesses are tourism and retail, and if we could look a little bit more outside the envelope for the future, which is what we're trying to do, and including different demographics, then perhaps we should expand the scope of what we're looking at as well.
Mr. Seals, any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook, and through the chair to Councillor Vander Valk. I've just made a few notes here about expanding it to ensure that it does incorporate not just tourism, retail, but also services and industry, manufacturing potentially. So, just for context, the tourism and retail analysis that would form the basis of a first step in this is really just to take note of where the town is right now. What types of amenities and assets we have from the perspective of economic development, to then build off that moving forward. So I think your suggestions are entirely appropriate, so we can incorporate those into the RFP when we proceed forward with it. And then you also made a comment about not duplicating efforts by other organizations, such as the PQBTA, Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, and that certainly would not be the intention. They've done multi-year planning processes leading to the point where they are now, and this type of effort would be intended to complement that and maybe draw on the resources that they've already developed to establish that snapshot and then move forward. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Worship. So very valuable discussion. I will remind Council that there is a project budget of $112,500 for this. So scope of the project is also defined by that budget amount. But staff has definitely taken those comments into considerations, and we'll see what we can do within that budget amount.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. I just had a couple of comments. I think one time when this came up, we had mulled around the idea of it including or making sure it included food security or food production as one of the complements in the mix. And also, I just wondered if I could get an idea of the 150 staff hours, when those would be involved. Is that part of the implementation, or is that, I mean, if we're hiring a consultant, I wouldn't think that it would be as staff intensive at this point in time. And the other thing, I was just going to make a comment. Councillor Vander Valk had said that tourism and retail are our drivers. I think maybe construction industry might be bringing in more money than maybe both of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so we did a retail gap analysis about 5 years ago, which council looked at, and I'm not familiar with, aside from some, like with East Village, or some additional commercial capacity has been added, but otherwise their downtown is pretty much the same as it was 5 years ago with respect. So I think if PQBTA is handling the tourism side, and we have a retail gap analysis that's about 4 or 5 years old, and is relatively current with respect, I'm just looking at the first phase, and I think that's basically done already then, unless we're going to redo work that was done about 4 or 5 years ago, which personally I wouldn't recommend. The other thing I just caution is that there's a lot of things I could say about expanding scope, but we have to be very careful. Do we want a document that can be actioned, or a document that gives us a wide view of here's all the things you could potentially do in Qualicum Beach? I worry we'll get a document that's 100 miles wide and 2 inches deep. And that's something with a very broad scope you can very easily get from a consultant, because for them it'd be very easy to copy and paste a 5-page what we heard, and then everyone says, wow, I was heard, and then there's no actual plan to implement, and we've basically spent $100,000 talking about things we'd like to see one day. So I just caution that. I know that through the RFP process, you might get someone with an excellent proposal that is focused, that has a clear idea of what they want to accomplish. So that might be a moot concern, but we're going to have to be very attentive through the RFP process about that, because I can see that going this direction. 2 other things. One, I think we're looping this a lot through the verbiage in the OCP, but I'd also point out there are some very clear questions in the quality of life survey in 2017 on economic development and which sectors people wanted to see in Qualicum Beach. And number 1 was healthcare. People really wanted to see more healthcare services. Respectfully, not vets. We've got lots of those. Right now, our pets arguably have better healthcare than the people. So I know what the Perfect Storm Group, they had a draft RFP, and we have an application coming up for the ground floor. But I don't, forgive me, like if the folks are watching who are behind that, at this point from what they've said, I don't have confidence they'll be able to actually create an organization to do what they want to do. So I'm just thinking that, I'm not saying that project in particular, but as one example of like healthcare services people are very attentive to, we might want to look at the quality of life survey for the priorities and sort of loop in some of the things people have already said. It is 6 years old, so it's a bit older, but there was a specific section on what economic growth we want to do, and I was trying to draw up the document, and I just got a thing on where to drop off my survey from 6 years ago, so it's not the best link. Yeah, that was just the last point in terms of cautionary note, and then we have a very detailed document from citizens where we had a lot of feedback from the public what they want us to prioritize, and we might want to consider getting a list of like 2 or 3 or 4 of the top priorities from citizens and sort of including that in the RFP.
Thank you. You're right. I still remember receiving that retail gap analysis, and I think it forms a basis for what's happening next. It's pretty relevant. And you're right. Healthcare was probably top of the list. The second one was housing for people who work in these facilities, and there may be need for more care type facilities. I know there's a waiting list at both Berwick's and the Qualicum Gardens, so there's going to be more of that. That's a good, actually good industry, creates good jobs, and people need to be taken care of. So those are the things that came to mind when we did this a few years ago. It was healthcare, housing, and food security also came up, that we need to do more to prepare for the time when we can't ship everything from California over to here. So I'm just wondering how much stuff are we going to get that we didn't know or couldn't think of when we spend that kind of money? I know we've got the grant, but I think it's okay. We're going to spend some money and we're going to get some feedback. But I think, as Councillor Harrison said, we got the feedback in our quality of life survey, which is fairly relevant and still fairly new. And the same with the retail gap analysis, and then with the study that Tour Association have done. How much more can we expect? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So lots of great comments. Certainly, we do have that 2018 retail gap analysis on hand. So there would not be an intention to recreate that. However, it has been 6 years and COVID happened in the middle. So there's likely been some changes so that some of that data may need to be refreshed. I think the bigger question and comments that have been really well received from council is that this should be a forward-looking document. We don't necessarily need more high-level policy. If anything, we might need more practical guidance on what it would take to actually realize these areas where the town wants to see continued investment, whether that's housing, healthcare, wherever there might be barriers, and how the town could address those. So I think there's a mutual intention to not spend time spinning wheels and recreating high-level policy documents. What we're actually looking for is really practical recommendations and guidance for the town in terms of moving forward. So I've been listening and making lots of notes, and I think we'll make sure the RFP reflects that.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Young.
I'd like to see the RFP delayed till after we have our OCP discussion, as to see what our citizens want. And I agree with Mayor Westbrook that is housing, medical, and Councillor Skipsey, food security. Those are priorities, and if we can't address that comfortably yet, then I just don't see how we can welcome the intake of more businesses or anything else coming into our community.
Well, and I agree with that, but I think what we're looking for and what you indicated was that we would see some actionable recommendations, not great blue sky thinking types of document, but actually things that we could do. And so that's what we're hoping for, is to be very pragmatic and actionable. Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Harrison.
So usually when it's more like a construction project, the RFP comes in and you have, here's the 3 bids and this is the low bid, and we recommend these folks to move ahead. This is something where I think folks on council might want to see the detailed RFP that actually gets submitted, even if it's not in a public meeting. So just when this eventually, because I think since we've got the grant, there's probably a timeline on it. So that's the only thing, to Councillor Young's point about delaying. We're going to run eventually into a timeline. We could delay it for a brief while, but eventually we will have to act on it relatively soon, just because there's a timeline. But when that council decision point is like who the successful candidate is, we might want to just share, even if it's between members of council and with some staff comments or something, what those RFPs are in full, just because I think everyone is more or less on the same page of we don't want to recreate what we already have. I think that's a fair comment.
Thank you. Ms. Vella, Mr. Sales, any comment on how we might best proceed with this? We're talking about a good chunk of money, and we also know what we have and what we already heard. So what's going to be new? Ms. Vella.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we could have the luxury of bringing this back to the next meeting, I think there's a discussion to be had here given the conversation we've heard at the council table, and I'd like that opportunity to consider that with the director. Is there an immediate deadline for this, Director Sales, or can we defer this to the next council meeting?
Thank you. So there is a broad deadline for completion of this project, and so I believe that would be it's early in 2026. So could it be delayed a little bit? Certainly, but it couldn't wait until completion of the OCP review, and this project would require a substantial amount of efforts on the part of a consultant. So pushing it too far would potentially create some issues.
Yes, but I do respect Mr. Varela's request to allow staff to have another kick at this before it comes back. So I would move that we defer this to a future council meeting. Pardon? Before you do that, yeah. Once you defer, I can't talk. Oh, sorry, sure,
So
go ahead.
can I just ask for when it comes back that we have clarification on the 150 staff hours? Because as we go into strategic planning, we know how sought after those staff hours that resource is. So if we could have more explanation as to how that time is going to be spent, then it might help too. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't answer that one right now. So the 150 staff hours would be spread out over the 1 year plus of the overall project, and it's essentially consultant management and attending potential meetings that the consultant may want to have with our residents and businesses. Thank you.
So the request is to defer this to a future meeting. I move Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk for the discussion. I wanted to say how I'm delighted that council is so thoughtful about not just, oh yeah, let's just issue an RFP, we'll spend 112 grand, we got a grant, but actually, no, what are we going to get for that? So I'm really impressed how we drill down right away as to before we go out there, what we're looking for. So with that, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And that concludes our meeting, and motion to adjourn would be in order. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk, discussion, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, staff, and thank you, Mr. Paul, for your presentation. I literally can't find the